I hope you enjoyed that little short video. When I recorded it, I was with my friend and my wife, and we were went to this area that's kind of like these giant sand dunes, and I brought my camera along and I just kind of wanted to record something. I wasn't sure what exactly I wanted to record when I got there. When I saw it, I was inspired. I was like, this looks like the desert if I show certain angles. And so I just decided that we were just going to record these big landscape shots with my friend, and I decided to do something that was kind of Star Wars based. And I hadn't really done a project like this before. A lot of these effects and whatnot you saw in the video were all done in like After Effects and Premiere. So I thought I would just create it, do something fresh, exercise my ability a little bit, and then also I wanted to create this to show you guys a little bit of how I did some of these effects. I won't get too technical, but I'll show you a little bit about what the project looks like on a timeline. So I'm gonna open up my computer and I'll show you. Alright, so as you saw, there was two shots that had the visual effects. Obviously there's color correction, so what you're seeing right now is just the raw footage, so it looks a little bit more flat and blue, but when I put it into Adobe Premiere, that's where I did a lot of the color correction to make things look a bit more warm, like a desert. And so, as you can see here, there was two shots. It was a wider shot, and it was a closer up shot. So the initial shot where he sees the Death Star in the sky. There's all kinds of YouTube videos out there about the specifics of how to do this in After Effects. But what I pretty much did was I just got a picture of the Death Star off of Google, and I dropped it into my project right here. It's just a PNG image, so it doesn't have this black background. Is actually transparent, so it goes really well when you're putting in video, so it's only showing the layer and the image that you want, not this border. Once I dropped it into my timeline and got it in my project, I put a mask around it just to try to cut out the edges where the edge of those clouds are and where the sand stops, so it doesn't look like it's just an image on top of something. I wanted to make it seem like it's off in the distance, out in space. And so that's what the mask is. I put a little bit of a feather on that, and then what I had to do is I had to track it to my image. So there's not much, but if you look at it, there's a little bit of this camera shake that happens. And so what I need to do is I need to track my camera's motion, not only with position, but also rotation, because I didn't have it on a tripod and I wasn't holding it completely still. So what I did is I just took my raw image and I went up to animate and track motion. I essentially found two locations on the ground because I couldn't use the sky or the clouds. There's just not enough contrast in that. So I used the footprints in the actual sand, and I chose two different spots that has like a lighter color and a darker color. Really, when you're tracking a shot, you want to have a lot of contrast in your image. Once I got that done, I just created a null layer. It's this layer right here, and then I just told that tracking to match onto that null layer. So everything that I need to track for the image that I'm adding, I can plug it into that null layer, and it adds that sort of movement to follow the movement of the camera tracking. To do that, pretty much all you have to do is you just take this little pick whip here and you just drag it over and drop it on the null. Once you have that null's information for the camera tracking movement, and then as you play through, it kind of follows that camera track, so you can see the Death Star is moving with the camera movement. And the last thing I did with this shot is I created a second mask with the original shot, and I just masked, as you can see here, around the bottom of the ground. And what I did that for is because I wanted to give it a little bit of a feather so that it kind of bleeds into the shot. It creates sort of like this distant atmosphere effect around the surface of the Earth, so that you can see right here the Death Star is a little bit faded out. And like I said, I just worked with the Death Star on color and contrast and brought the opacity so it's a little bit more transparent down a good bit to give it that sort of soft, distant, kind of seeing it through an atmospheric look. And then I just rendered it out of here and plugged it into my Adobe Premiere project. If we go to my second shot that has a little bit more effects to it, as you can see here, there's a lot more information on the timeline, all these different layers. And what I did is I did the exact same thing with the Death Star, except I moved it up a little bit. I had to resize it because it's a wider shot than the other one. And I just did the same thing. I tracked 2 points for position and rotation and added a null layer and pick whipped it to the null layer so that it follows the camera track. Interesting thing about that is once you create one null layer that has that shot motion tracking, then you can essentially, anything you add to your image, like the TIE fighter that I'm going to show you here in a minute, you can essentially go back to that same null layer and just add it to that same null layer because it has the same information. And although you're using keyframes to manipulate it around your image, it's still going to follow that camera movement the same as anything else, just like the Death Star. So again, I just want to briefly explain how I got the Death Star. So I went and did a lot of research online. There's actually 3D models and 3D software plugins that you can put into After Effects. But believe it or not, I didn't have like $200 or whatever it was, or I didn't want to spend the money in order to get the software. So I did something that's a little bit different. I actually went online and found just a 3D model of a TIE fighter, and I just went through a whole bunch of positions because I kind of knew which direction I wanted the TIE fighter to be facing in my image. So what I did is I just went through and I just screenshotted all the different positions that I wanted for my TIE fighter. And then I went into After Effects and I masked around all of my different layers. I think I had like 21 layers or something of that nature. And when you see it, it looks just like this. And as you can see, it just kind of moves because that's the position of my TIE fighter throughout my shot. I'll play it through again just like that. So it feels like it's actually looking different ways. Although it's a little bit choppy, it actually looks really smooth in the image because it's moving so quick and I'm using keyframes and motion blur. You can't really tell that it's actually bouncing around like that. Once I had all my layers, I could just create one sequence timeline in After Effects, and I just added all these different layers of my different positions and how long I wanted it to stay on each position. Then you can actually take that sequence and drop the whole sequence on there so it looks like one layer. It's not all 21 different layers. So once you add that sequence to the timeline, then I just use keyframes and motion blur to just create the motion. So I worked with position and I worked with scale, and you kind of work with the keyframes a little bit to get that speed and position exactly where you want it. I used a little bit of ease in. If you worked with After Effects before, you know what that is. And as you can see, there's motion blur on it. And so really it's just a matter of scale and positioning and rotation because I already have my TIE fighter angle movements on that sequence. Like I said before, I added a top layer with a mask around it because I wanted the TIE fighter to fly out from behind the sand dune. So it looks like it's flying in from the distance, and I think it worked out really nicely actually. The last thing I did was I added a few overlays to get that laser shot and the smoke coming off the ground and this charred sand effect for when it fires at him. And pretty much I'll go kind of frame by frame, I'll take it really slow anyway. That laser is only a few frames long and it's essentially just a PNG image of these two green shapes that I created in Photoshop. And I just essentially, if you take it really slow, you can kind of see that it's in there for just a few frames and then disappears. That explosion effect is actually a sparkler I found on YouTube. So if you have an overlay, which is essentially you can use like green screen, or you can use a simple just black surrounding of the image you want, then you can plug it into After Effects, change your blending options on your layers to like screen in the opacity section, and then it cuts out all that black and just has the effect, or just has that burst of light that you want. So I did that twice here for the two shots. It has one sparkler effect and another one, and I just resize it to make it look like it's a giant laser shot. Second to the last thing I did was I added this smoke effect, and it's actually a free overlay that I got online of just dust. And I just resized it, repositioned it, and put a little bit of a mask around it so that it kind of looks like it's originating from that blast spot. And then the very last thing I did was I got this charred look here on the ground, and I did that. Actually, it was very easy. All I did was I took a video, like a 10-minute ASMR video of coals in a fire, and it was black, it was night outside, and so I actually used it as an overlay. I just changed the blending options to screen, and then I resized it and squished it down because it was just a flat image looking directly at fire coals. I just dropped it down to look as if it's, you know, sitting there on the surface of the ground, and then I again just took those layers and brought it back down to the null object so that it follows that camera track. As the TIE fighter is flying by, I just shot a little bit of smoke up from the ground as if it just flew really close to the ground and just kicked up a bunch of dust everywhere. That's pretty much all I wanted to show you in this video. Again, I plugged these shots after I rendered them out and put them into my Adobe Premiere, where I did all of my sound mixing, I did my color correction. Even at the very end of the shot, I actually used a keyframe and zoomed into my shot a little bit so I can kind of make this jumping around effect as the TIE fighter appeared to fly by the camera at the very end. It just adds a little bit more to the realism of the shot and just wows your audience a little bit more. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was interesting to you. I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel. Right now, me and my brother, we have a podcast and we're just working on growing the audience and just creating cool content for you guys. So again, thank you for watching the video. Like and comment if you liked it. Let me know if you want more of these kind of videos in the future, and I will create them if you do. Thanks for watching.